cash flow. Cash flow is the first topic of the exam, and it will be in your Unit 4 finance exam. So there are several parts to this topic, and several key areas you need to be able to do. Firstly, we need to be able to know why do businesses complete cash flow forecasts. You need to be able to complete the calculations within a cash flow forecast. You need to be able to interpret the cash flow forecast and consider impacts of positive and negative cash flow. With interpreting, you need to be able to make decisions based on business cash flow from given scenarios. And like in any topic, it's really important that you think about the business scenario when giving advice in your exam. So this is a cash flow forecast, and this is usually done by month. Most businesses will do these because it helps businesses to keep an eye on what's coming in and what's going out. There's 4 parts to a cash flow forecast. Firstly, there's the inflows here at the top, and this records any money or any cash, for example, any sales that are earned by the business. That could be through cash sales, it could be through credit sales, but it can also be through a loan or any funds that are obtained for the business. So provided it goes into the bank account, it gets recorded here in the inflows. We then need to work out the total inflows, and to do that we simply add together all of the amounts here and put them in the total inflows, and that's the first section. The next section is outflows, and these are all the expenses incurred by the business. Anything to do with a payment that the business makes gets recorded here. They may pay it yearly, they may pay it monthly. If it's paid monthly, it is recorded in every month. If it's paid annually, then it might only get recorded once over the year. So this includes things like stock. Another word for stock might be ingredients if you're in the food business. Rent, another word for rent might be premises. That means where the business actually run their business from. Advertising, salaries, could be wages there as well. Heating, lighting, utilities, phone, mobiles, computer costs, IT costs. It also includes those one-off costs. You might want to pay a decorator to paint your building. You might want to, or you might need to employ a plumber to fix the taps or something. Any of those costs at all, and certainly also insurance, content insurance, vehicle insurance. You might have stock insurance. Any of those types of expenses are recorded here. Again, we total them up, and all we do is add all of those amounts together and put the total in there. It's best to work section by section, and that way you can sort of focus on one particular area. We then come to what's called net flow, and to get the net flow, it's total inflows minus total outflows. And again, best to work on one section at a time, so go through and do your net flow calculations. Once again, that's inflows minus outflows is your net flow. The first month's opening bank balance, this is the final part of our cash flow, it's the bank balances. The first opening bank will either be given to you, so you'll be told how much the amount is, or you'll need to find it in the scenario or in the question. That's a really important part, because if you don't get that bit right, then all of these calculations won't be accurate. So opening bank for the first month is taken from either the question or it will be given to you. Your closing bank is simply your net flow plus your opening bank. Net flow plus your opening bank will give you your closing bank balance. So if this is the amount on the 30th of the month, that means that the next month on the 1st is simply the same as the closing bank the month before. So this amount gets transferred up here. And again, our closing bank for the next month is simply net flow plus opening bank equals this. Where we have a negative, we simply enter it in the calculator and perform it the same way we would in maths. So it would be minus 90 plus 2,970 equals 2,880. And that's how we complete a cash flow forecast. Okay, one of the other tasks that really do earn you the higher grades in your exam is for you to be making financial recommendations based on a cash flow forecast. And in order to make those recommendations, you need to know what decisions business will be using their cash flow forecast for. So let's have a look. So several decisions that a business might make when they use their cash flow forecast. So let's have a look at what they are. So firstly, they might be deciding whether to produce new goods or services. So what I want to know is, have they got enough cash to be able to do that? Because selling new goods or services or producing them can be expensive. Secondly, they might decide to invest in new resources. That might be to invest in some new technology, it might be to invest in some new equipment, or something like that. Investing in new resources can also be updating. It doesn't have to be the purchase of new resources. They might also want to carry out new activities, so something completely different to what the business already does. This is known as diversifying, but again, before a business can do that, they need to know that they've got enough cash coming in to be able to support their new activity. And number 4 is to expand. So instead of using the surplus cash to make different products or do something new, they might just want to simply do more of what they already do. So they might want to increase the number that they produce by 50%, for example. But on the other hand, if they've got a negative cash flow, they might need to reduce their activities as well. They might need to decide that actually they can no longer afford to produce as much as they do, and so they might need to reduce those activities as well. Cash flow forecasting, really, really important. The main point is to work out if they've got enough cash to maintain their operations. It's used to show the liquidity of a business. So can the business pay its bills? That really is the main point. Obviously, if a business can't pay its bills, then it's not going to be able to continue to operate. It helps the owners make important business decisions, like the ones we just discussed. Should we do something new? Should we expand? Do we need to cut back? And they'll use a cash flow forecast to help make those decisions. They need to look at both cash surpluses and cash deficits and make the decisions that are going to work. If it's in a cash surplus, which is a cash positive, then perhaps they can look at doing new things. If it's a cash deficit, which is a negative, then they might need to look at reducing. So as I said, if it's a cash surplus, they will probably want to be looking at these things. So producing new goods, investing in new resources, carrying out new activities, or expansions. So if in the exam you're asked to make a financial recommendation and they've got a cash surplus, then it's these 4 areas that you can recommend. They could produce new goods, they could invest in new resources, they could carry out new activities, or they could expand. You obviously need to make that specific to the scenario that you're working with. On the other hand, if they've got a cash deficit, they'll need to make a decision about changing the goods and services. Do they need to sort of do something a bit differently, or contraction, which is another word for reducing the activities. So that's if it's a cash deficit. So if the balance is negative and you're asked to make a financial recommendation, then those are the two decisions that you can recommend. Okay, when we're explaining in an exam, the best way to approach it is using PEI. So it's point, what decision do you recommend? Explain it, what do you mean? And the impact. And it's always best to think about this in terms of what will happen to the inflow or the outflow, what will happen to the net flow, and what will happen to the cash flow. Let me give you an example. Okay, let's say this is the cash flow for a pet store, and we've been asked to make a financial recommendation based on this cash flow. We're going to answer it using the PEI technique. So as you can see, we're in a positive or a surplus. So our decisions are that we can invest in new resources, we can expand, we can do something different, and so on. So our point is going to be, we're going to, based on our cash surplus, we're going to invest in some new equipment. So we might decide that we want to display our fish tanks in a more appropriate way. Therefore, we're going to invest in some new fish tanks for our presentation of fish. The impact is as follows. In the short term, it's going to impact on our outflows, increasing them in the short term. However, in the long term, because our fish are presented in a much nicer way, our inflows will rise over time, thus creating a positive impact on our cash flow in the long term. And that's how we go about answering a financial recommendation using PEI. Okay, quite often different stakeholder groups will want to see cash flow forecast. So we need to think about why they might be interested, and they'll also be wanting, their focus will differ depending on whether it's a surplus or a deficit. So we need to think about the following stakeholder groups. So owners, if it's a cash surplus, they'll be pleased because the extra cash balances could be used to, one, increase their profits that they retain, or it can allow them to obviously invest, hoping to make even more on what they had already. So they'll be really pleased if it's a surplus, because ultimately it means more profits for them. If it's a deficit, they'll be really worried because obviously they're the owners of the business, and that means that their return on their investment isn't so great. So they'll be really concerned about a cash surplus deficit. It means that the business is not doing so well. They'll struggle to pay their suppliers, for example. They might not be able to pay their staffing costs. So they'll need to be looking for some sort of solution to their cash flow problems. That might be a bank loan, for example. The next group of stakeholders that will be interested in a cash flow are the employees. If it's a surplus, the employees will feel really good about that because it means their job is secure. Because if the business is doing well, remember, a cash flow shows the liquidity of a business and can it pay its bills. So if we're in surplus, the employees will be thinking, great, my wages can be paid, my job is safe. If it's in deficit, the employees will be really quite worried because, on the other hand, their job's not secure. If a business is having cash flow problems, it might mean that wages can't be paid. Usually in times of difficulty, overtime might get cut, pay might be frozen, and in worst case scenario, they might even lose their jobs. So employees will be really worried if there's a cash flow deficit. Customers probably won't be too aware of any cash flow difficulties. So unless it's a public limited company, a lot of the time customers won't know too much about the cash flow of a business. But if it's in surplus, customers will be obviously pleased because it means that after sales service is likely to be reliable. It's not going anywhere. They can rely on taking that product back in a few years' time, and they won't have any problems with the after sales service. However, if it's a cash flow deficit, customers might get very worried because if a business is in danger of not operating, where are they going to be able to return that product to? What happens if they took out a warranty with that store? Who are they going to contact when there's a problem? They might have paid for an order, but they might not get it. So it's a real worry about a deficit, because if the business is not going to be there, who are the customers going to be dealing with? Financiers are another stakeholder group, and that's people who loan money to the business, basically. And they'll be pleased if we're in cash flow surplus, because it means their loans can be repaid, and they'll be more likely to lend money to a business that has a really healthy cash flow surplus, because it just means that their debts are likely to be repaid. If they're in deficit, they may be very worried because their loans might not be repaid. So they'll be very reluctant to lend any further money, and they might stop any further loans that the business might request. Lastly, suppliers will be interested in the cash flow of a business. If it's in surplus, cash flow showing surplus means that suppliers are going to get paid. So they know that if a business is ordering from them, the supplier is going to receive their money. On the flip side, if a business is in deficit, they will be a little bit worried because they'll be concerned about who's going to pay their bill. If a business offers credit, then they might stop that credit and say, do you know what, you need to pay now within 7 days because we're not sure that you can pay your bill. Okay, cash flow forecasts are generally done using a spreadsheet program. They might have a more sophisticated accounting software package, but generally a cash flow is done using a spreadsheet. There are obviously advantages and disadvantages for doing so. As you'll have experienced when doing your cash flow on a computer, calculations can obviously be done really quickly, obviously provided the formulas are correct. The person completing the cash flow or setting it up has to make sure that they enter the formulas correctly. If that's done, then the calculations are accurate. The second advantage is that recalculations can be made quickly, and it allows for what-if scenarios. So when we've got formulas in, and I'm just going to go to a spreadsheet to show you. Okay, so I've got formulas set up in here, so I can do a what-if scenario. So I can decide that if Noed is not going to show any signs of getting his B grade, I can see what happens. If I change that to a C, I can see what happens to that overall total. And I can see that if I put it to a B, his grade would be CD. If I put it to a C, it doesn't affect the overall grade. If he gets a D, I can see that the grade drops down. So because I've got formulas in there, it updates all automatically. That total changes every time I make an edit. It all updates automatically. Now, obviously, if I didn't have a formula, I would have to be going on a calculator and redoing that each time. Okay, another advantage is that they can be used to produce charts and line graphs. Obviously, really quickly, you just need to highlight the data. You can also insert your spreadsheets into other documents, so you can put them into presentations. And you can also compare them. So you can do a forecast and then go back and do an actual one and make adjustments and see what's actually happened. And that can be done really quickly. Like in anything, where there are advantages, there are also disadvantages. They can be quite large, so if you're working with thousands and thousands of entries on a spreadsheet, it can be really difficult to view, and it might often print out on many, many pages of paper. Secondly, a small mistake, such as a small error, might be really hard to detect, and it could be causing major errors on your spreadsheet. You've got to make sure the formulas are right. Thirdly, learning how to set up all the formulas can be quite difficult, and that does take some time and effort. So if you're just learning, quite often a piece of paper can be much faster. Changes are easy to make, however, if you're not saving each of your separate documents, then you haven't got sort of records over time. You're only updating it. So you you'd have to be saving it as separate documents, otherwise you won't know what changes have been made. Like anything, if it's on a computer, you can lose work. You have to make sure you back it up, but obviously there is the risk of losing your data. Okay, so to finish off and in summary, cash flow forecasting is really, really important because it helps a business decide if they've got enough cash to be able to meet their expenses. It shows a business's liquidity. Used to make important decisions about the business. And helps a business decide whether it's in surplus or deficit, and they can make decisions based on that. The decisions being invest in new resources, expand, diversify, or even reduce their activities.